My name is Elijah Porter. I'm 34 years old, and until the morning of February 3rd, 2023, I never believed in supernatural encounters, at least not for people like me. I was raised in the church, sure, but over the years, my faith had eroded into routine. I was the kind of believer who prayed only when it was convenient, who sat in pews with a numb heart and eyes on the clock. I thought I knew God. I didn't. That morning, I wasn't expecting death. I had gone in for a routine outpatient surgery, nothing dangerous, just a minor correction in my lower abdomen. I kissed my wife, Layla, before they wheeled me away. She smiled at me like always, believing I'd be back in just a few hours, sore but fine. And for a while, things went exactly as the doctors expected. But somewhere between the scalpel and the sutures, my body betrayed me. I heard the first alarm while under anesthesia. It wasn't part of the physical world. I know that now. It was distant, like a hollow bell echoing underwater. Then came the cold, an unnatural cold that started in my bones and wrapped itself around my soul. The heart monitor screamed. Doctors swarmed. I felt none of it. Instead, I slipped out of my body like vapor, rising toward the corner of the ceiling, hovering silently above the chaos. I remember looking down and thinking, that's not me. That's just flesh. Time stopped obeying its usual rules. 1 minute stretched endlessly, the next vanished like smoke. I could see every detail in the room, the trembling hands of a nurse, the sweat beading on the surgeon's brow, even Layla pacing in the waiting room just beyond the door. I tried to call out to her, to scream her name, but I had no mouth, no breath, just consciousness, just presence. Then everything shifted. I wasn't in the hospital anymore. I was moving, being pulled through a space that wasn't quite a tunnel, but more like a tear in the fabric of reality. There were no walls, yet I felt enclosed. No floor, but I wasn't falling. Around me were streams of light, pulsing with frequency, waves I could feel more than hear, like music translated through my bones. Each current seemed to sing in a different tongue, and yet I understood them all. They weren't just sounds, they were truths. Then I saw it, him, Jesus. He didn't need an introduction. Every part of me knew him instantly, like remembering a name I had always carried but forgotten how to speak. He stood in radiant stillness, his form cloaked in layers of light, yet more real than anything I'd ever seen on earth. I fell, or rather, I collapsed inward before him, not out of fear, but out of some deep, ancient recognition. I was made to kneel before this presence. He spoke, and his voice didn't strike my ears. It struck my being. "Elijah," he said, "do you know why you've come at this hour?" I looked around, confused. It still felt like the middle of night. I saw no clock, no sun, just a horizon pulsing with something that felt alive. "What hour?" I whispered, or maybe I just thought it. Either way, he answered. "The sacred hour," he said, "the window between the fading of darkness and the birth of light, the time when I walk among those who wait." And then he showed me. He reached out, not with a hand, but with what can only be described as intention. And suddenly I saw homes, cities, bedrooms all over the world. Some were quiet, filled with people asleep, but others shimmered. In them, people sat upright in prayer, their faces damp with tears, their journals open, their lips whispering scriptures in the dark. "This," he said, "is the hour of visitation. Between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., the veil is thinnest. I visit those who are awake. I call those who are seeking, and I speak to those who dare to listen. Tears flooded my eyes, though I had no body. I wanted to repent for every morning I'd slept through his knock, for every time I'd silenced the stirring in my chest with excuses like, I'm tired, or I'll pray later. But Jesus wasn't angry. He was grieving. I called you many times, he said gently, but the world is louder than my whisper, and the bed is warmer than the fire of my altar. That's when I understood this wasn't just about me. It was about us, all of us who claim to believe, yet miss the very hour he chooses to meet us. There was no transition, just knowing. One moment I stood before Jesus, suspended in eternity, and the next I was witnessing something that words can hardly capture. It felt like he peeled back the skin of the world and showed me its soul. I hovered above cities cloaked in darkness. Rows of houses lay still beneath silver blue skies. Yet in certain homes I saw light, not physical light, but spiritual fire. Jesus motioned, and we descended, not into one home, but into dozens at once, as if I was both singular and everywhere. In one home, an elderly woman sat in a recliner, her fingers wrapped around a worn Bible. She wept silently, praying over the names of her grandchildren. The walls of her home shimmered with unseen angels. In another home, a young man lay prostrate on the floor, trembling as he whispered, God, I don't know what to do anymore. I saw demons trying to whisper lies into his ears, but they backed away when Jesus' presence entered the room. They didn't flee because the man shouted. They fled because he surrendered. In yet another, a child sat cross-legged in bed, eyes closed, praying aloud while the world around her slept. Her voice was soft, unpolished, but the heavenlies responded as if a trumpet had sounded. These, Jesus said, are those who respond to my stirring. I awaken hearts between 3 and 5 a.m., for this is the hour I walk among the faithful. Few rise, fewer stay, but those who meet me here are given keys. I looked at him, confused. Keys to understanding, he replied, to healing, to revelation. I speak loudest to those who dare to listen in the quiet. He took me higher, far above the earth, until the whole planet looked like a vast, pulsing orb. Dotted across its surface were pinpricks of light, each one a soul awakened in the early morning hours, communing with heaven. But surrounding them were oceans of darkness, millions, no, billions still slumbering spiritually, unaware of the divine invitation passing by like vapor. Jesus' expression turned sorrowful. So many say they want me to speak, but few will rise when I knock. The hour is free, yet it is costly. He then pointed to the clock. It was 3:01 a.m. The number glowed golden, suspended in space. And then I saw something terrifying. Dark clouds, not of water but of oppression, began seeping into the cracks of certain homes. These clouds carried fear, anxiety, and torment, what Jesus called nocturnal warfare. He said these spirits are most active between 12 a.m. and 5 a.m. because that is when most people are vulnerable, sleeping, unguarded, unaware. But when my people rise, he continued, and light a flame of prayer between these hours, they create spiritual fortresses. The enemy trembles not at noise, but at alignment. I saw it then. When believers prayed between 3 and 5 a.m., walls of fire erupted around them. Demonic forces were repelled not by volume or eloquence, but by the power of willing sacrifice, the cost of lost sleep, the faith in unseen movement. Then Jesus spoke again, but this time with urgency in his tone. "There is coming a time," he said, "when the early morning hour will be all some have left. When chaos silences the day and confusion clouds the night, those who've met me at dawn will stand unshaken." The images changed again. I saw news headlines flash across the sky: global conflict, financial collapses, technology gone rogue. But in each crisis, I witnessed certain people standing firm. They were calm while others panicked. They spoke wisdom when others screamed. And every one of them had one thing in common. They had met with Jesus in secret between 3 and 5 a.m. "These are my Daniels," he said softly. "They walk among fire and are not burned." I didn't know what to say. My spirit was undone. I had wasted so many mornings. I had ignored so many whispers. I thought of all the nights I felt a nudge to pray but hit snooze instead. And now, standing here before eternity itself, I finally saw what I had missed. Then Jesus turned to me with eyes full of both tenderness and gravity. "Elijah," he said, "when I return, will I find you awake?" Before I could answer, everything began to shift again. The light around us dimmed, not from evil, but because the vision was fading. I could feel my spirit being pulled backward, like a thread snapping back through a needle. I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay in that truth forever. But it wasn't time. Not yet. I felt the moment of transition like wind folding around me, soft but unstoppable. The brilliance of Jesus' presence dimmed just slightly as he brought me into what I could only describe as a spiritual classroom. Yet there were no walls, no ceiling, just endless light, warmth, and clarity. It wasn't a place of information, it was a place of revelation. Jesus walked ahead of me and waved his hand. Instantly, before us appeared a timeline stretching from the beginning of creation to the present day. It hovered in the air like a living thread, woven with moments of fire, tears, and glory. He pointed to several places on the line. "This is when I stirred my prophets to rise early and speak," he said, touching a glowing point that pulsed like a heartbeat. Elijah, David, Daniel, each of them kept watch before the dawn. Another point blinked. Here, my son prayed in the garden, while others slept. Another. Here, revival began in a barn when a few men decided to meet me at 4 a.m. for 40 days. Jesus turned to me, and his voice thundered, though not loud. It was a thunder of meaning, a weight that pressed through my being. "Do not despise the hidden hours. This is where heaven meets the earth unnoticed. And what is built in secret will shake nations in the open." I swallowed hard. The conviction was thick in the air. Then he reached his hand toward me, and in his palm appeared an old-fashioned oil lamp. It flickered, barely lit. "This is the state of your morning flame," he said gently. I looked down in shame. I knew it was true. How many mornings had I ignored the tug? How often had I chosen comfort over communion? And then he handed the lamp to me. "Will you rise and feed the flame?" Tears burned behind my eyes. "Yes, Lord," I whispered. "But how?" He responded instantly. "Set no goal but presence. Wake to wait, not to achieve, and I will meet you." Then, as if anticipating the questions I didn't dare speak, he answered them one by one. "What if I feel nothing?" Faith is not a feeling. It is the key that turns the lock, even in silence. "What if I'm too tired?" I give strength to the weak and increase the power of the faint. "Ask, and I will awaken you." "What if I don't know what to pray?" The Spirit will intercede for you with groanings deeper than words. I couldn't breathe. The love, the invitation, the majesty, It was too much for my small spirit to contain. And still, he wasn't finished. Jesus stretched his hand again, and I saw a vision within the vision. Families huddled around candlelight at 3:30 a.m. during a blackout. A mother singing softly as she prayed over her children. A man alone in a garage, whispering scripture. A teenager journaling her dreams, asking God what they meant. I saw those small, hidden acts like sparks, each one igniting something far larger than it appeared. "This," he said, "is how I prepare my warriors. In the dark, in the quiet, when the world sleeps, I train those who will not fall when the shaking begins." Then came the heaviest moment of all. Jesus brought me to a high place, an endless ridge overlooking the spiritual landscape of the earth. I could see prayers rising like mist from homes all over the globe. Some were strong pillars of fire, others flickered, hesitant. Many were absent altogether. But off in the distance I saw storms. They weren't weather, they were judgments, shakings. They moved with a divine intelligence toward the nations, toward cities, toward churches. Jesus spoke again, this time with deep sorrow in his voice. Many are not ready. They have oil for today, but not enough for what's coming. I called to them in the morning. Few answer. I couldn't speak. My soul trembled. I wanted to fall at his feet and cry, "Use me, train me, wake me." But he already knew. He turned to me one last time in that place and said, "Go back and tell them. The morning is no longer optional. It is war." Then the light around us pulsed, and I felt it again, the pull, the backward rush, the strange gravity of re-entry. I didn't want to return. Every fiber of my soul longed to stay in that reality where everything made sense, where every question was met with presence, not just answers. But it wasn't my time. When I opened my eyes, the world was unbearably loud. The beeping of monitors, the sterile buzz of hospital lights, the distant sound of a nurse's shoes squeaking on the floor, everything felt foreign. I didn't even know I was back in my body until the sensation of weight returned. Gravity, skin, breathing. But the strangest part wasn't being alive again. It was how dull the world seemed compared to where I had just been. It was like going from a symphony to a muffled whisper. The colors looked faded. The light was gray. Everything felt slower. I blinked a few times, trying to orient myself. My chest hurt. My throat was dry. A doctor stood nearby, startled to see my eyes open. I could hear someone shout for assistance. I must have flatlined, however briefly, and now I had come back. But something inside me had not come back the same. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't confused. I wasn't even panicked by the monitors blaring. I had only one thought, burning through me like fire on dry wood: wake up and rise early to pray. It made no sense medically. I had just survived death. I was weak, disoriented, and still hooked up to tubes. But all I wanted, needed, was to meet him again in the silence between 3 and 5 a.m. When I was released a few days later, I was a man transformed. I couldn't even talk to my wife without tearing up. I'd sit quietly on the couch, gripping a mug of tea and staring at the window, waiting for the clock to strike 3. I tried explaining it, but words failed. My wife, Lydia, was patient but worried. She said I'd gone through a trauma, that I needed rest, therapy, normalcy. And maybe I did, but the call was louder than sleep, louder than logic. So I set my alarm. 3 a.m., the hour of surrender. At first, nothing happened. I'd sit in our living room, wrapped in a blanket, reading scripture and whispering prayers. It felt awkward. I was sleepy. My body ached. But every time I even thought about skipping, I'd hear Jesus' words echo inside me. Set no goal but presence. Wake to wait, not to achieve. And then, slowly it began. The dreams came first, vivid, symbolic dreams I couldn't ignore. I started keeping a notebook by my side and writing them down. I saw things in these dreams, warnings, encouragements, people I hadn't spoken to in years. One night, I dreamed of a childhood friend named Marcus kneeling alone in a dark field. I hadn't spoken to him in over a decade. That morning, I messaged him. He replied, "Bro, I was about to kill myself last night." I broke down. That was the first miracle. Not financial, not dramatic, just rescue. Quiet, personal rescue. The second miracle came in the form of peace. I began to wake without an alarm. Something in my spirit stirred me gently each night, always between 3 o'clock and 3:30. I'd wake up alert, grateful, and strangely joyful. That joy wasn't because everything in my life was fixed. It wasn't. We were still behind on bills. My body still felt weak. My job didn't magically change, but I had changed. The third miracle was something I never expected. Others started to awaken too. At first, I kept my experience private, but when I finally shared my testimony at our small church group, something shifted. 3 people approached me afterward and said, "I've been waking up at 3 a.m. too." I thought it was insomnia. No, it was invitation. From that day forward, we started a pre-dawn prayer group. It wasn't big, just 5 of us. But every morning, we gathered on a group call at 3:15, lit candles and prayed. Sometimes in silence. Sometimes we read psalms. Sometimes we just wept. I'll never forget the morning one of us received a word about a local church leader who was secretly about to walk away from ministry. We prayed. 2 days later, that same leader called one of our members out of the blue, confessing that they had planned to resign and abandon everything, but had experienced a strange, sudden peace at exactly 3:30 a.m. and didn't know why. This was no coincidence. This was what Jesus had shown me. The watchman's hour was real. And yet, it wasn't without cost. The more we leaned into it, the more resistance we felt. People mocked us, even other Christians. Some said we were legalistic or overly mystical. Others simply didn't believe my story. They told me to move on, focus on family, be practical. But I couldn't. Not when I'd seen it. Not when I'd stood in front of the King himself and heard the command, "Warn them." The morning is no longer optional. It is war. The more I leaned into the calling to rise at 3 a.m., the more my dreams intensified. What started as gentle, symbolic visions began transforming into prophetic snapshots, flashes of things that felt too real to ignore. It wasn't just about my healing anymore. It wasn't just about my prayer circle. Something much larger was stirring. A convergence. It began one morning, just before the clock struck 3 o'clock. I was already awake, heart racing, when I saw a flash of light behind my closed eyelids. Not from the room, not a car, not lightning. It came from inside me. My ears began to ring, not painfully, but like a tuning fork vibrating at a higher pitch. And then I heard it, not an audible voice, but a message so clear it carved itself into my chest. In the days ahead, my spirit will knock upon the hearts of many, but only those awake will answer. I sat up, trembling. I had never heard anything so vivid in the waking world. That same morning, I received a message from a man I hadn't spoken to since college. He wrote, "I don't know why, but I've been waking up at 3 a.m. for weeks. I thought of you. Are you still into God stuff?" He had no idea what he was stumbling into. But I did. More people began reaching out. Strangers from old social media accounts, coworkers, even non-believers. All of them were describing the same thing, waking between 3 and 5 a.m., sometimes with heart pounding, sometimes hearing whispers they couldn't explain. Some were afraid. Others felt inexplicably called to pray. A few had even Googled, "Why am I waking up at 3 a.m. every night?" and found bizarre spiritual articles that only left them more confused. But I knew what it was. I had been shown what it was. This wasn't random. It wasn't hormonal. It wasn't stress. It was recruitment. Jesus had said during my NDE, "This window will be misunderstood by many. But for those with ears to hear, it is the trumpet before the dawn." It clicked. The early morning hours between 3 and 5 weren't just quiet, they were primed. The veil was thinner. Heaven was closer. It was the hour of visitation. But most of us were asleep. Literally. Spiritually. And so, the warnings came. One night, I had a dream of a massive digital storm, billboards, apps, phones, all glowing in red with distractions. Everyone's faces were lit by screens. Meanwhile, just outside their windows, angels stood knocking, begging, trying to be heard, but no one opened the curtains. The message was crystal clear. The hour of visitation has arrived, but the bride is distracted. And then came the clearest vision yet. I was standing on the edge of a massive cliff at dawn. A line of people behind me, all blurry, all holding candles. The sky was still dark, but from the horizon, I saw a light breaking through. Not the sun, but a divine radiance. The kind of light that speaks without words. Then Jesus stood beside me, not like before, not radiant this time, but like a warrior. Not soft, but serious. Not smiling, but sorrowful. He pointed to the horizon and said, "When the light crests, many will regret their sleep." I gasped, and then he added something that shook me to my soul. "I warned you to wake early, but few did. When the hour is full, the gate will close to those who did not answer the knock." I shot awake in bed, soaked in sweat, heartbreaking for the millions I knew were spiritually asleep. People I loved, friends, leaders, good people asleep. That morning, I couldn't just pray. I wept, and then I knew it was time to go public. I started small. I posted anonymously in a few Christian groups, sharing my experience without naming names or preaching. Just asking, "Has anyone been waking up at 3 a.m. lately?" The responses flooded in. "Yes." I thought I was going crazy. God's been telling me to pray, but I've been too tired. I've been ignoring it. I didn't know it was Him. I compiled the messages. I started recording my dreams. I put together a short video explaining the pattern, the purpose, the urgency. I expected maybe a few hundred views. Instead, it exploded. In a week, it hit 1.2 million. It was never about the numbers. It was confirmation. The Holy Spirit was activating the watchman, the remnant. This wasn't just a call for me to wake up at 3 a.m. It was a call for an army, and they were answering. Here is part 6 of Elijah Porter's near-death experience, concluding his divine journey and prophetic commission. Part 6, the final knock. The days following the video going viral were unlike anything I had ever experienced. Emails flooded in, testimonies, confessions, cries for help, and spiritual awakenings. Some wrote in all caps, "I've been waking up at 3:33 for weeks." Others shared that their children had begun having dreams at exactly 4:04 a.m., dreams of angels, of warnings, of light breaking through darkness. But among the flood of hope came a trickle of fear. Others weren't waking up in peace. They were waking in terror. Some heard knocking but were too afraid to open their eyes. Some felt a presence, intense, holy but overwhelming. And some confessed they knew Jesus was calling, but their shame was louder than their obedience. I remembered what Jesus said to me in the afterlife. Many will feel me in the night, but not all will rise. Pride and fear will rob them of the blessing. One morning, I was jolted awake at 3:01 a.m. My room was silent, but my spirit was thundering. I went to pray, but before I could speak, I was in the vision again, transported as if in a dream but awake. I was in a hallway made of glass. On one side, I saw people asleep in their beds. Good people, families, young and old. On the other side, I saw heavenly beings, bright as lightning, gentle as doves, walking down the hallway, knocking softly on each door. Some doors opened, most didn't, and with each unanswered door, the angels passed by, tears in their eyes, scrolls still in hand, unread, unopened. Then I saw my own door. The angel stopped, knocked once, twice, and just before he reached for the handle, I opened it. The angel looked at me with relief, then placed a scroll in my hands. On it was one word, warn. I woke up gasping. I knew it wasn't just about me. This wasn't a personal call. It was a final assignment for all of us. The scroll was a commission, and so I obeyed. I started a prayer call from 3 to 5 a.m. online. I expected 10 people. We had over 8,000 in the first week. Some just listened in. Some cried the entire time. Some spoke in tongues. Some heard God for the first time in years. We had Muslims, atheists, Buddhists, all waking up at the same hour, asking the same question. Why now? Because this was not coincidence. Jesus had told me, between 3 and 5, the veil thins. In this silence, I whispered destiny. As I leaned deeper into this commission, I noticed a shift in myself too. My finances stabilized. My anxiety gone. My purpose clear. It wasn't magic. It was alignment, a spiritual convergence that only obedience could unlock. And then came the last dream. It was short, almost abrupt. I was back in the afterlife, standing before Jesus again. This time, his robe was white with a sash of deep blue, and his eyes didn't just see me, they saw through me. He said one final thing. Tell them the hour is not random. The knock is not subtle. I am near. Then he reached out his hand and gently touched my forehead, and I woke up weeping. Again. But this time it wasn't grief. It wasn't even fear. It was urgency. So if you're reading this or hearing this, and you've been waking up between 3 and 5 a.m., know this. You're not crazy. You're not alone. You're being called. This is not about sleep cycles. It's not about stress. It's not about coincidence. It's a spiritual alarm clock, a divine knock on the door of your soul. Open it. Pray. Listen. Write. Weep if you must. But answer. Because I believe with all my heart, with all my soul, with all my spirit, that these early hours are no longer optional for those God is awakening. We are the forerunners, the watchmen, the intercessors of this generation. And Jesus is knocking now. So, will you rise? Have you been waking between 3 and 5 a.m.? Has something stirred in you recently that you can't explain? Comment below. I hear the knock. Let's build a community of watchmen, rising early, listening closely, and preparing for what's coming. Subscribe for more near-death experiences and prophetic testimonies that reveal what God is doing behind the veil. Because the hour is late and the knocking is growing louder.